Vsevolod Pudovkin was a Soviet director, screenwriter, and actor. He is a seminal figure in early Soviet cinema, and he revolutionized film theory through his pioneering work in editing. Pudovkin's work emerged amid the Soviet montage movement of the 1920s, which was a time of radical experimentation in film form, where they rejected the static, theatrical style of early cinema. Pudovkin viewed editing as the essence of cinematic art. He said, "The basic means of expression, which is unique to motion pictures, lies in the organization of the shots, which in themselves contain the elements of the larger forms, the scenes and sequences." So this idea of putting two moving images together, one after the other, is something that wasn't done in any other art form, only film. Pudovkin credited D.W. Griffith's intolerance with inspiring his interest in film's narrative potential, particularly in its use of parallel storytelling. When he first started studying film, Pudovkin joined Lev Kuleshov's film workshop, known as the Kuleshov Collective, where he studied film theory and practice. And, as it turns out, it was Lev Kuleshov's experiments that shaped Pudovkin's theories of editing. Lev Kuleshov came up with what has since become known as the Kuleshov effect, which noted that audiences derive meaning from shot relationships. Alfred Hitchcock explained it nicely.
Now we have a close-up. Let me show what he sees. Let's assume he saw a woman holding a baby in her arms. Now we cut back to his reaction to what he sees, and he smiles. Now what is he as a character? He's a kindly man. He's sympathetic. Now, let's take the middle piece of film away, the woman with the child, but leave his two pieces of film as they were. Now we'll put in a piece of film of a girl in a bikini. He looks, girl in a bikini, he smiles. What is he now? The dirty old man. He's no longer the benign gentleman who loves babies. That's the difference. That's what film can do for you.
In other words, how the viewer interprets a shot is dependent on what is shown in the shots before and after it. This really underscored editing's power to construct reality, and Pudovkin expanded this and came up with 5 different methods to use editing, not merely as a technical necessity, but as a means to direct spectators to interpret thematic connections between shots. He wrote, quote, "Editing is not merely a method of the junction of separate scenes or pieces, but is a method that controls the psychological guidance of the spectator," end quote. In other words, editing isn't just a way to put the scenes in the order you'll watch them on the screen. He called this sequential editing. It can be a tool that helps the viewer evoke emotional and intellectual responses or manipulate time and space. He called this relational editing. This was especially important in films of the early 1900s since they didn't have sound, and any way to give the audience more information without resorting to the fairly inelegant method of putting a title card up on the screen was a huge leap forward. So Pudovkin came up with 5 examples of relational editing that could be used to control the psychological guidance of the spectator, conveying an emotion or idea without actually saying it. The 5 editing techniques are contrast, parallelism, symbolism, simultaneity, and leitmotif. Let's look at some examples to see how each of these work. Contrast is used to force the viewer to compare 2 opposing scenes in their minds. The training montage in Rocky IV is a perfect example of using pure imagery and editing to contrast the ideologies, work ethic, and symbolism behind Rocky Balboa and Ivan Drago. On one side, Drago trains in a sterile, high-tech Soviet facility surrounded by scientists, computers, and cutting-edge equipment. His workouts are precise, controlled, and monitored. He's being built like a machine. The implication is that he's an engineered athlete, the results of Soviet science and state sponsorship rather than personal grit or heart. Meanwhile, Rocky's training is the complete opposite. He's in the harsh wilderness, chopping wood, lifting logs, dragging sleds, and running through deep snow. His training is raw, primal, and entirely self-driven. The natural setting emphasizes his reliance on sheer will, personal struggle, and a deep connection to his roots as an underdog. He's not being programmed, he's forging himself through suffering and determination. The montage ultimately shows that Rocky's strength comes from within, from adversity and from his refusal to quit, whereas Drago's is external, created by a system that sees him as a tool. It's the classic battle of nature versus technology, human spirit versus manufactured power, and ultimately, heart versus machine. The baptism montage in The Godfather is one of the most powerful juxtapositions in cinematic history. On one side, we see Michael standing in a grand church, participating in the sacred ritual of baptism for his nephew. Michael, dressed in a pristine suit, solemnly responds, "I do," as he accepts the responsibilities of Godfather, not just in the religious sense, but in the mafia hierarchy as well. Simultaneously, his men are systematically assassinating the heads of the rival crime families. The contrast between the sanctity of the church and the blood-soaked violence outside couldn't be starker. Michael is fully embracing his role as the Don, securing his power by orchestrating a merciless massacre, all while publicly maintaining the facade of a respectable, legitimate man. The irony is overwhelming. He is renouncing Satan and church while committing the very sins he claims to reject. This moment seals his fate. He has surpassed his father in ruthlessness and abandoned whatever moral conflict he once had. The baptism symbolizes not just the christening of his nephew, but the rebirth of Michael Corleone as a full-fledged mafia boss, now irreversibly tied to violence, deception, and power. In Schindler's List, we see Nazis going into a building in a Jewish ghetto and start killing people. Even as their gunshots are ringing out, we hear this music start to play. It seems incongruous to what's happening on screen, and you might wonder why this music was chosen for this scene. Then, the movie cuts to a Nazi officer playing the piano. The juxtaposition underscores the theme that art and civilization do not necessarily equate to morality. Two other soldiers walk in on him playing, and one says, "Is that Bach?" And the other says, "No, that's Mozart." The piece he's playing actually is Bach. He's playing English Suite No. 2 in A minor. This is an extra little detail to show the Nazis' superficial engagement with the culture they claim to uphold. Their appreciation of classical music is shallow, much like their self-perception as a superior and cultured people despite their horrific actions. Another famous example can be seen in 2001: A Space Odyssey, where the ape-man throws the bone, a primitive weapon, up into the air, and then the film cuts to a space station. The placement of these shots forces a spectator to consider just how much mankind has evolved over the years. Another interesting thing about this scene is that Kubrick had originally planned a voiceover to reveal that this satellite was actually an orbiting nuclear weapon, which would make it parallel in another way by cutting from a primitive weapon to a super advanced weapon. In the end, though, Kubrick chose not to include this because he felt it would create associations with Dr. Strangelove and decided not to make it obvious that they were war machines. I'm pretty sure that Kubrick took this idea from this edit from Powell and Pressburger's 1944 film A Canterbury Tale, where the film cuts from a falcon flying and jumps forward hundreds of years later to a plane flying in the sky. Not all uses of contrast in editing are for dramatic purposes, though. Because comedy thrives on subverting expectation, a joke lands best when the audience anticipates one thing but gets hit with something entirely different, so a contrasting cut is perfect for comedic purposes. In Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, Indiana Jones is describing Marcus Brody.
Brody's got friends in every town and village from here to the Sudan. He speaks a dozen languages, knows every local custom. He'll blend in, disappear. You'll never see him again. With any luck, he's got the Grail already.
Does anyone here speak English?
The reality is completely different. In Shaun of the Dead, Shaun and Ed are killing zombies for the first time.
It's doubly funny because of the contrast between the two guys. Shaun's face is in shock,
while Ed is eating ice cream and seems like he's hardly noticed he's just killed someone. Parallelism is used as a way to connect two scenes by matching certain aspects of a scene: sounds, shapes, movements, or objects. An example of this is in Hugo, which uses the inner workings of a clock to connect it to the workings of 1930s Paris. It is often used to jump from one time period or location to another in a more elegant way. In Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, it starts on a young Indiana Jones and then cuts to a much older Indiana Jones wearing the same hat, showing that years later, he's still the same Indiana Jones he always was, and he still has his hat. In Strangers on a Train, Alfred Hitchcock cuts between two sets of feet walking on a train platform. We don't know who they are, but the cut indicates that there is a relationship between the two of them, and we'll need to wait to find out what it is.
I did it, and I was proud to do it.
In Amadeus, Mozart is trying to get inspiration for his new opera, but his wife just left him, and his mother-in-law is shouting at him.
Shocked to my foundation when I saw her. I couldn't believe my eyes, poor little thing. Oh, you monster! No one exists but you.
We see how he gains inspiration for his opera as her yelling becomes opera singing, and it cuts to the singer in the production giving her big crescendo as Mozart is conducting.
You selfish thing! Selfish, that's what you are, selfish! Simply selfish! You hear that?
This is doubly funny if you know anything about opera, which I don't, but I looked it up, because the opera character who is singing in the scene is the evil Queen of the Night from the Magic Flute, and she's the mother of the hero's love interest. In Jurassic Park, The Lost World, a mother hears her daughter yelling for help. She runs up to find something horrible. She opens her mouth to scream, and we cut to Jeff Goldblum yawning. The parallel elements being the open mouth of the yawn, the screaming noise of the train, and the palm trees on the billboard behind him. This is a pretty contrived way to jump between scenes, and I think Spielberg knows this, as Jeff Goldblum looks literally directly at the camera right afterwards, as if to say, yeah, we know what we just did. Ridley Scott did the same thing in House of Gucci, but it feels slightly less elegant still. I'm not even sure this is a serious cut. It feels like a joke, but a joke would be out of place in what otherwise seems like a pretty serious movie. Incidentally, these two cuts almost certainly took inspiration from Alfred Hitchcock's The 39 Steps.
One day, Odious sent them a dead one.
The Fall has a couple very pleasing graphic matches that jump the viewer from one scene to the next. In this shot, the movie's villain has killed a rare butterfly that Charles Darwin has been searching for and sent it to him. Later on, Darwin is banished to a tiny island called Butterfly Reef to mock him.
Butterfly Reef. That's where Governor Odious chose to banish our heroes. To mock them. Hoping that in their fight for survival, they would devour each other.
Later, the heroes are betrayed by a priest and sent to die in the desert heat. The film fades between the face of the priest who betrayed them to the desert where they are sent to die. These slow fades highlight these plot points in a very visual way. Symbolism gives objects, actions, or settings metaphorical meaning. It's about telling stories by being suggestive. One of the most famous edits of all times is a symbolic cut. In Lawrence of Arabia, T.E. Lawrence is trying to convince an officer to let him go out into the desert. The man warns him just how hot and dangerous the desert can be. Lawrence holds up a match, and as he blows it out, the film cuts to a shot of the sun rising on the desert horizon. The juxtaposition of these two shots underscores the fiery heat and hotness of the desert environment. Both Steven Spielberg and Martin Scorsese have mentioned this cut specifically as a very influential moment in their development as filmmakers. In Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, there's a cut that goes from blood flowing down the bathtub drain to the eye of Janet Leigh's murdered character. If eyes are the window to the soul, then this cut practically literalizes the metaphor of a life down the drain. Charlie Chaplin's movie Modern Times starts with a shot of livestock being herded by, and then cuts to a shot of people crowding to work. It's a very clear visual metaphor for industrialized labor. Chaplin draws a direct comparison between the treatment of animals and the dehumanization of workers in a mechanized society. That's what this movie is all about, and he basically states the theme visually in the first two shots. Simultaneity is also called cross-cutting, and is a term used where there is a continuous cut alternating between two or more scenes that often happen at simultaneous times but different locations. In The Devil Wears Prada, the film cuts back and forth between Meryl Streep getting out of her car and all the employees in the office feverishly preparing for her arrival. This does three things. It builds anticipation and power dynamic. The rapid intercutting emphasizes Meryl Streep's power and the level of fear and respect she commands. The employees' frantic efforts to prepare, adjusting desks, fixing their appearances, and rushing to have everything in place, contrast with Meryl Streep's calm, deliberate movement. This contrast reinforces that she is in control while everyone else is on edge. It establishes the workplace culture by efficiently conveying the cutthroat and high-pressure environment of Runway magazine where they all work. Without exposition, we immediately understand that Miranda's arrival is a daily ritual that dictates the mood and behavior of the entire office. It's also a great character introduction through impact. Instead of simply showing Meryl Streep enter, the film shows her effect before she even steps into the building. This approach makes her presence larger than life, reinforcing her reputation before she even speaks. We can tell just by the way people are preparing that she's probably a pretty strict and unpleasant person to work with. One of the most famous examples of cross-cutting comes from Silence of the Lambs. The movie cuts back and forth from a SWAT team preparing to storm the house of the serial killer Buffalo Bill, while he is inside racing around trying to rescue his dog from the woman he's been holding prisoner. The scene ends when the SWAT team rings the doorbell. At this point, we realize the cross-cutting has actually been a red herring.
We're going in.
The SWAT team is at the wrong house, and Jodie Foster's FBI agent, Clarice Starling, is at the front door of this serial killer all alone, without any backup. This throws the viewer completely off, as one minute you think the killer is about to be captured, and the next minute the situation is completely reversed, and the main character is in extreme danger.
There's no one here, Jack. Clarice.
Another example of cross-cutting is in Gallipoli, where Mel Gibson has orders telling the troops to stand down from charging into what will be certain death. We watch the men prepare and cut back and forth from them to Mel Gibson running as fast as he can to deliver the message.
I want you all to remember who you are. You're the 10th Light Horse, men from Western Australia. Don't forget it. Good luck.
Flexibility.
You too.
It's excruciatingly tense as you wonder, will he make it in time before all these men are gunned down? Pudovkin said himself, quote, The whole aim of this method is to create in the spectator a maximum tension of excitement by the constant forcing of a question such as, in this case, will they be in time? Will they be in time? The method is a purely emotional one, and nowadays overdone almost to the point of boredom. But it cannot be denied that of all the methods of constructing the end hitherto devised, it is the most effective." End quote. Leitmotif is what Pudovkin described as reiteration of a theme. It's often a musical term that describes a recurring musical phrase. In film, this musical phrase is often associated with a particular person, place, or idea. Think of the Indiana Jones theme, which is associated with the man himself, or the grim-sounding Imperial March in Star Wars. Pudovkin talks about leitmotif not just in the musical sense, but in a visual sense, describing a recurring shot or scene that has some sort of meaning or symbolism. In the case of Spielberg's Jaws, the leitmotif of the underwater point-of-view shot was used. Every time you see this underwater shot, you know that the shark could be nearby, ready to attack at any moment. This visual leitmotif was combined with the two-note musical leitmotif of John Williams' score, which has become a classic piece of suspense music synonymous with approaching danger.
Time's getting short.
In High Noon, the leitmotif of the clock is shown over and over, making the viewer aware of how time is running out and how desperately Gary Cooper needs to find an ally before it's too late. Pudovkin's techniques remain vital because they exploit cinema's unique capacity to manipulate time and perception. By treating editing more like a language than a technical consideration, he enabled filmmakers to convey subtext, emotion, and ideology without dialogue. And if you needed any other reason to study Pudovkin, none other than Stanley Kubrick said, "The most instructive book on film aesthetics I came across was Pudovkin's Film Technique." Pudovkin gives many clear examples of how good film editing enhances a scene, and I would recommend this book to anyone seriously interested in film technique. You can see these 5 principles at work in every film today, from Christopher Nolan's temporal experiments like Memento, Inception, and Tenet, to Bong Joon-ho's class critique in movies like Snowpiercer and Parasite. Modern cinema is continually reinventing Pudovkin's methods, proving their relevance 100 years later.